Welcome to the Accomplished Brain podcast, where we share our passion, knowledge, and experience about the brain and health.
One thing we're going to talk about today is the concept of neuroplasticity, which by definition of the Webster's Dictionary is the brain's ability to change and expand over time through demand. And what we're going to do today is, through our course and through Andrew, we're going to kind of walk our way through neuroplasticity and what it is in our terms, so on and so forth. And I think it's important to know that neuroplasticity has been described in a lot of different ways. And you have people like neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, who talks about it in regards to neurons and synaptic responses. But I think Andrew has really dialogue this out in a really interesting way of what neuroplasticity is at a molecular level.
Okay, great. So yeah, I wanted to, thanks, Jeff. I think that was very well said, and that was really good. So what I want to do is share in deep terms, but then in very simple terms of really what's going on in neuroplasticity, and look and explain and I'll explain what our therapy really is all about. And when you can explain that, it's pretty amazing. So I'm going to take in, and Jeff, this is okay for us to share our screen?
For sure.
Okay. So I'm going to share the screen, and this is from our manual from our course. And I want to first talk about what's happening. Let me go into this. Oh, here we go. Okay. So what happens in a nerve is the nerve, it's really interesting, is the nerve has energy inside and outside the cell, right? And what happens is usually there's sodium so there's potassium that sits outside the cell, and there's sodium. I mean, the potassium is inside the cell. That's your K, right? And then there's sodium that's sitting outside the cell. And what happens is you have depolarization. And what the depolarization means is the way the nervous system reacts is you have a receptor, right? Like an antenna, like an electrical, and that when you get an activation, a neuron gets activated, right? They'll have that will cause an electrical charge or energy, and that causes the sodium to go into the cell and the potassium to come out of the cell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is up here, you'll see that when the nerves fire at an appropriate rate, they rest, right? They come down to a resting stage. And when they fire, they get to like 100. The neurons start to fire, they last a bit along, and then they die out, right? And then they come back down to a resting level. What happens when people have some kind of abnormal firing, or some kind of, like, they get like a head injury, whether it's a traumatic brain or a concussion, they start now it's very difficult for those neurons to get back to a resting state of negative 65. So that means that you see how nice and then when it fires up, and then it lasts a little bit, and then it comes back, and then it finally, comes back, it dies out, and then it comes back to rest, right? Well, when you have these head injuries, they alter the firing and they alter the ability to come back down to a rest state. So what happens is the neurons are always at this heightened state of very close to threshold of firing. And when they're very close to the threshold of firing, right, they will fire very rapidly and then die out very fast, and they fatigue, right? So what happens is that when you see that start to happen, you'll start to see that at the cellular level, these neurons will start to lose connections, And when they lose connections, they start to develop abnormal function. So then let's relate that to an area of the brain with memory. When they lose the abnormal firing in the hippocampus or the frontal or the parietal lobe, they'll lose short-term or long-term memory. If they come into their balance centers, their vestibular system, they start to lose, their balance starts to decrease. If it gets in, if this abnormal firing happens, and what happens is they lose connections in the frontal lobe, their motor function will start to inhibit. So they'll see that they'll have their gait patterns will be off, their posture will be off. So the thing is that we know from 30 years ago, based on the research, that we can with the right exercise and stimulation, we could remodel that pattern and get the nerve cells to come back to a resting state. We could get the nerve cells to basically fire normally, and it could get this picture to happen again. We could get the nerve cells to start to make more connections. And the more connections they can make, that's the neuroplasticity, right? And we're going to talk about what goes into that. And once they start to make more connections, they start to make neuroplasticity. They start to get the brain, the circuits to change, and they start to get the change. What happens is over a long period of time of neuroplasticity, once they get that over a long period of time, they develop long-term potentiation. And the difference, the explanation of long-term potentiation is if I give you a simple eye movement, I give you a simple balance exercise from our software, right? If I give you that 4 times a day, every time that I give you that exercise, you'll see that your balance will be better, or your eye movements will be better, or your gait, your walking pattern is better. Long-term potentiation. So that's plasticity. I give you that, the circuits change, the function changes. Now, if I do that enough times, we start to develop plasticity where we develop long-term potentiation, LTP. When we develop LTP, what that means is now I don't have to give you the stimulation as much, but the changes still are there. So an example is, just say I gave you 4 times a day, and in about 10 days, we start to within about 3 or 4 days, we start to see every time you do the exercises, they change. Well, then say about 10 days or 1 month, you don't have to do the exercises 4 different times a day. You might have to only do them twice a day. And you're still seeing the same result. The balance is better. The walking pattern is better.